The knock came at 2:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock on my dashboard for the past hour, watching the minutes drag past like they owed me something. My back had stopped hurting around midnight. That's what 3 weeks of sleeping in a front seat does to you. Eventually, your body just gives up complaining and accepts the new reality. The flashlight hit my face through the driver's side window before I could fully sit up. I squinted into the beam, my heart doing that old man lurch it had been doing a lot lately, and I saw the silhouette of a man in a dark jacket. Not a uniform, a jacket. He held up a badge wallet against the glass. I rolled down the window. "Sir." His voice was flat, professional. "Can I ask what you're doing parked here?" "Sleeping," I said. I didn't see any point in pretending otherwise. He shone the flashlight across the back seat, my duffel bag, a box of protein bars, a library book I hadn't been able to concentrate on, 2 dress shirts hanging from the grab handle in dry cleaning bags, because I still had 2 interviews lined up that week and I refused to let them wrinkle. "Can I see your license and registration, sir?" I handed them over without argument. I was 63 years old, sitting in a 2009 Honda Accord with 190,000 miles on it, and I had nowhere else to go. I had stopped being embarrassed about it somewhere around day 10. By day 22, I had stopped feeling much of anything at all. He took my documents back to his vehicle. I watched the red and blue lights pulsing against the dark storefronts of the strip mall where I'd been parking far enough from the entrance that no one bothered me, close enough to the all-night diner that I could use their restroom in the mornings if I bought a coffee. It was a system. I had become very good at systems. He was gone for a long time, longer than it should have taken. I watched his silhouette through the windshield of his vehicle. He was on the phone. Then he was on the phone again. Then he got out, walked toward me, and stopped about 2 feet from my window. He looked down at my license again, like he was checking something. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Walker," he said. "Is your mother's maiden name Hargrove?" I blinked. "Yes." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He looked back at his vehicle, then at the license again, and I watched something shift in his expression, something I couldn't quite read in the half-dark of that parking lot. When he looked back at me, his voice had changed. Still professional, but careful now. The way people get careful when they're holding something fragile. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. Let me back up 26 months, because none of this makes sense without the 26 months. My wife and I had been married for 31 years when she sat me down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in October and told me she wanted a divorce. She didn't say it the way I had always imagined people said things like that. No crying, no apology, no long build-up. She sat down across from me with her hands folded on the table like she was chairing a meeting, and she said, "I've already spoken to an attorney. His name is Patterson. I think it's best if we keep this civil." I remember thinking, Patterson. That was the first word my brain snagged on. Not the word divorce. Not 31 years. Just the name of a man I'd never met who apparently already knew more about the end of my marriage than I did. I should tell you what our life looked like before that Tuesday morning, so you understand what was on the table. I had worked for the same engineering firm for 27 years. Meridian Structural Solutions, based in Columbus, Ohio. I started there at 36. The oldest junior engineer they'd ever hired, because I'd spent my 30s going back to school at night while working days at a fabrication plant to support my wife and our 2 kids. I graduated with my PE license at 35. Meridian hired me at 36. I gave that company everything I had. In 2009, during the worst of the financial crisis, I developed a load distribution algorithm for long-span bridge retrofitting that allowed existing structures to handle significantly increased weight tolerances without full reconstruction. It took me 4 years of evenings and weekends. The kind of work you do because the problem won't leave you alone, not because anyone asked you to. I filed the documentation with Meridian's internal IP department. They told me it had been reviewed and logged. I signed some standard forms. I went back to work. The algorithm became the backbone of 3 major federal contracts over the next decade. I know this because I worked on 2 of them. I was proud of those projects. I used to drive my grandchildren across a bridge in Cincinnati and tell them, "Your grandfather helped make sure that thing holds." I never once thought to ask what had happened to the IP filing. By the time my wife sat down across from me with her folded hands and her attorney's name, I was earning $112,000 a year. We had $340,000 in retirement accounts, equity in a house we'd owned for 22 years, and a vacation property in eastern Tennessee that we hadn't used in 3 years because we'd stopped taking vacations together somewhere around the time our youngest left for college. 6 months later, I was sleeping in my car. What I didn't know that Tuesday morning was that my wife had been having an affair with Patterson for 14 months. I wouldn't find that out until much later. What I did know, the day I finally hired my own attorney, a younger woman named Susan, who worked out of a small office near the courthouse and charged me $200 an hour, which was all I could afford, was that Patterson had filed the divorce petition in a jurisdiction 2 counties over, citing my wife as a current resident of that county based on an address that belonged to her sister. Susan explained to me that this kind of venue manipulation wasn't unheard of when one party had connections to the local legal community. The judges in that county had worked with Patterson for 15 years. I did not have 15 years of anything in that county except the gas receipts from driving through it on the highway. The retirement accounts were split. That was fine, I understood that. The house equity was divided. Also fine, more or less. What I did not expect was the way Patterson structured the alimony, the way the asset appraisal somehow undervalued my pension options, and the specific legal language around what constituted marital income versus individual earnings potential. By the time the decree was finalized, my take-home was committed to payments that left me $1,400 a month to live on. My rent at the time was $1,150. I lasted 8 weeks before I fell behind. I lasted 12 weeks before the landlord started the process. I was out by week 17. The car had been a practical decision, not a dramatic one. I had done the math. A storage unit for my things cost $89 a month. The car got decent gas mileage. I could shower at the YMCA for $10 a drop-in visit, twice a week. I had a gym bag in the back with everything I needed. I had my laptop and my credentials, and I was still applying for work every single day. I was 63 years old, a licensed professional engineer with 27 years of experience, and I was applying for jobs every single day. I did not have a single interview that wasn't canceled before it happened. What I learned at 63 is that the world has a very specific face it makes at men like me. It is not a cruel face. It is not even an unkind face. It is simply the face of someone who has already moved on and is politely waiting for you to understand that you should do the same. There were 2 interviews I did get. Both were for project management consulting roles, the kind of work I could do remotely, the kind that valued credentials over youth. I pressed my dress shirts in the morning before each one, hanging them from the grab handle overnight so the steam from the hot coffee I held under them could work out the worst creases. I sat in my car in the parking garage downtown and put my laptop on the passenger seat and straightened my collar in the rearview mirror. I got 1 call back. The second interview was a Friday afternoon. I parked in the strip mall near the diner, like I always did, and I thought, maybe next week looks different. Maybe next week I have an offer. Maybe I can afford to rent a room. Maybe I can stop doing the math every morning about whether I have enough gas to get to the library. That was the Friday night the agent knocked on my window. I stepped out of the car the way he asked. The night air was cold, early February in central Ohio. The kind of cold that finds the gaps in your clothing immediately. He introduced himself properly then. Special Agent Donahue, out of the Cleveland field office. He had a second agent with him, now a woman who had apparently been parked at the far end of the lot. She nodded at me, but didn't speak. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. Your name came up in connection with an ongoing investigation. The flag on your file is from 2021. It's not criminal, it's informational. But when I ran your license just now and it matched the profile, I was required to make contact." "What kind of investigation?" I asked. He paused. Can I ask, are you aware of any intellectual property filings you made during your time at Meridian Structural Solutions? The cold didn't bother me for a moment. Something else was happening, something behind my sternum, a pressure I couldn't name. I filed something in 2013, I said. A load distribution algorithm? Bridge retrofitting? He looked at the woman agent. She was already writing something in a small notebook. Mr. Walker, he said. That algorithm was commercialized by Meridian beginning in 2014. It has been licensed to 11 federal highway contracts in 7 states. The most recent contract was valued at $340 million. There are currently 3 subcontracting firms that have incorporated it into their proprietary systems and are actively marketing it. I stared at him. The IP filing you signed in 2013, he continued, was not a standard employee assignment agreement. Our forensic accountant flagged it in 2021 during an unrelated audit of Meridian's federal contracting records. The language of the filing, when cross-referenced with your original documentation, which Meridian is required to retain, indicates that you retained co-inventor status with a licensing rights clause that was never disclosed to you. It was buried in an addendum, standard boilerplate on the surface. But it's there. I don't understand, I said. Though I was beginning to. You were owed royalties, he said, beginning in 2014. You were never paid. Meridian's legal team apparently made a calculation that you would never look. That you'd signed enough forms in 2013 that they could argue the point if it ever came up. He paused. It came up. The second agent looked up from her notebook. Mr. Walker, is this current address? She glanced at the license, still accurate? I looked at my car, the dress shirts hanging in the back, the duffel bag, the box of protein bars. No, I said. That address is not current. Something moved across Agent Donahue's face. He looked at the car again, at the packed back seat, at the gym bag, at all of the careful geometry of a life organized into a very small space. He cleared his throat. Sir, he said quietly, do you have somewhere to stay tonight? I don't want to tell this part of the story the way these stories usually get told. I don't want to give you the number first and watch it land like a stone. Let it do all the emotional work. Because the number isn't actually the point. The number, when Susan walked me through the forensic accountant's report 9 weeks after that parking lot, was substantial. 11 contracts. 9 years of unlicensed commercial use. 3 firms actively profiting from incorporated methodology. Meridian's legal team tried to argue ambiguity in the 2013 filing for about 60 days before their lead attorney apparently reviewed the addendum language one more time and had a change of heart. The settlement negotiations lasted 4 months. The federal contracting irregularities ran parallel to a DOJ inquiry that I was told, politely, I did not need to worry about directly. My portion, before Susan's fees, was just under $4.1 million in back royalties and damages. There was also a forward licensing agreement that Susan negotiated hard, for she earned every dollar I paid her that entitled me to a percentage of any future use of the original algorithm framework for a period of 12 years. The first thing I did was pay Susan. The second thing I did was rent an apartment. A regular apartment, nothing dramatic. 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building near the University District where I could hear students walking home on Friday nights, and it sounded, against all reason, like the best sound I had heard in years. The third thing I did was sit at my new kitchen table, a folding table from Target, because I hadn't bought furniture yet, and think about the last 31 years. I thought about my wife. I thought about Patterson, whose license before the state bar was under review by the time I moved into that apartment. Because Susan had been very thorough about documenting the conflict of interest inherent in an attorney who represents a client in divorce proceedings while conducting a personal relationship with that client. The Bar Association has a word for that. Several words, actually. I thought about the specific face that the world had made at me during those 22 months. The patient, politely dismissive face that said, "You're done, move along." And I thought about how I'd gotten up every morning in that parking lot and pressed my shirts and driven to the library and applied for jobs anyway. Not because I expected it to work. I'm not going to rewrite that part of the story into something more heroic than it was. Some mornings I did it because I genuinely believed something would turn. Other mornings I did it because I couldn't think of anything else to do. And some mornings I did it simply because stopping felt like a kind of dying I wasn't ready for, and the shirts were already hanging there, and there was a library 3 miles away that opened at 9. Here is the thing about being 63 years old and having your life pulled out from under you. You find out very quickly what you're actually made of. Not in the motivational poster sense. Not in the what doesn't kill you sense. I mean in the very literal, very unglamorous sense of discovering which habits are actually yours and which ones belong to the life you were living. I had been a husband for 31 years, and I discovered I did not miss being married to the woman who had sat across from me with her hands folded and her attorney's name ready. I missed the idea of it. I missed the weight of another person in the house, the sound of someone else's coffee being made in the morning, the small bureaucracy of shared living. But her specifically I found, in the long, quiet hours of that parking lot, that I had been lonely inside that marriage for a very long time. Long enough that the loneliness of the car felt familiar in ways I hadn't expected. I had been an engineer for 27 years, and I discovered that I missed it viscerally and immediately, and with a physical ache that surprised me. Not Meridian. Not the politus and the performance reviews and the quarterly meetings, the work itself, the problem that won't let you go. The 4 years of evenings that produced something real enough to hold weight on a bridge in Cincinnati. I started consulting independently 3 months after moving into the apartment. Small firms at first, the kind that couldn't afford a full-time PE but needed one for a specific project. I charged a reasonable rate. I worked from my kitchen table and then from a proper desk I bought when the table started feeling too small. I had 2 grandchildren who started coming over on Saturdays. My daughter had been quietly horrified by what had happened to me and guilty about not having known sooner, and we had some difficult conversations about all of that over the course of many months. My son called more than he used to. People recalibrate when they realize they almost lost something they'd taken for granted. About 8 months after the settlement, I was driving through Columbus on a Thursday afternoon, coming back from a site visit for a small firm I was consulting with, when I passed the building where Patterson had his office. I didn't stop. I wasn't going to stop. I just noticed it. The glass-fronted building. The parking lot with the expensive cars. The name on the directory that you could read from the street. Except the name wasn't there anymore. I slowed down enough to read the directory properly. The firm name was still there, but Patterson's name had been removed. There was a paper notice in the corner of the lobby window that I couldn't read from the road. I found out later, from Susan, that the Bar Association's review had concluded. The finding was not in his favor. He had 60 days to wind down his practice. My ex-wife had, by that point, moved into her sister's house, the same address Patterson had used to establish false residency for the venue manipulation. The irony of that was not lost on me, though I won't pretend I took any great satisfaction in it. I took a small satisfaction in it. I am 63 years old, and I have earned a small satisfaction. Last spring, I drove to Cincinnati with my 2 grandchildren. We took the bridge. The one I've been driving across since they built it, the one I can point to and say, your grandfather's work is in that. Not the visible parts, not the cables or the deck or the towers. The math underneath it, the calculation that says this thing will hold. My grandson, who is 9, asked me how a bridge stays up. I told him it was about understanding where the weight actually goes. That most people look at a bridge and see the obvious supports, the towers, the visible structure. But the real work is in how you distribute the load across the parts that aren't obvious. How you find the places where the force transfers and make sure they're strong enough to take it. He thought about this for a moment, watching the water below us. What happens if you get it wrong? He asked. Things fail, I said. Not always right away. Sometimes they hold for a long time before you see the failure. He seemed satisfied with that. He went back to looking at the water. My granddaughter, who is 12 and already more practical than anyone else in our family, asked me if I wanted to stop for lunch on the way back. I said yes. I said I knew a good place. I said I was buying. I still drive the 2009 Accord sometimes. I bought a newer truck for the site visits, practical and reliable, but I haven't sold the Accord. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because getting rid of it feels like erasing something I'm not ready to erase. Not because the memory is good, it isn't, particularly, but because it happened, and I am who I am. Partly because of the man who sat in that parking lot and pressed his shirts and drove to the library and kept applying anyway. There are mornings now when I sit at my kitchen table, a real table, solid oak, bought from a craftsman in Newark who makes furniture in his garage, and I drink my coffee and I look out the window at the university, kids walking to their early classes, and I think about Agent Donahue's face in that parking lot. The way he looked at my back seat and then looked at me. The careful way he asked if I had somewhere to stay. I think about what would have happened if he had run someone else's plates that night, if I had parked on a different block. If the flag from 2021 had been filed differently, or never cross-referenced, or buried in the same way the 2013 addendum was buried, I think about how many things had to happen in exactly the order they happened for that knock on my window to occur. I don't believe in luck, exactly. I'm an engineer. I believe in load distribution. I believe in the integrity of the underlying structure. I believe that the forces always go somewhere, and if you understand the system well enough, you can figure out where. But I also believe that sometimes you park in the right lot on the right night, and a man with a flashlight and a federal badge finds something in his database that changes everything, and you are standing in the February cold in an Ohio parking lot in clothes you've been living in for 3 weeks, and the entire trajectory of your life shifts in the span of a conversation. And the only preparation you had for that moment was that you kept showing up. Every morning. Shirt pressed. Laptop charged. 3 miles to the library. 1 foot in front of the other. That's not wisdom. I'm not trying to sell you wisdom. That's just what I did because I didn't know what else to do. But it turns out that's enough. Sometimes that is precisely enough. My grandchildren are coming over on Saturday. I'm making breakfast. The apartment is small, but there's a couch they like, and a view of the street, and a grandfather who has time now and intends to use every bit of it. The bridge holds.